this illiberal turn has deep-seated roots in American history. I spoke to two major historians about it, Jill Lepore from Harvard University and Timothy Garton-Ash from Oxford University. Welcome, both of you, to the programme. So, Jill Lepore, let me ask you, because you write a lot about this. Explain what the liberal world order is, in short, obviously, and is America actually departing from it right now?
Well, the liberal world order has its origins in the Second World War, really in the alliance between Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But in the aftermath of the war, in which the United States assumed authority on a global stage as a beacon of liberal democracy and put money behind that promise, there are many ways in which the United States fell short of those ideals, as many critics of American imperialism would suggest. But American commitment to peaceful resolution of disputes around the world through its own economic force has been crucial to what stability there has been for the last 80 years of world history. So this is an incredibly important turning point, an inflection point. No one knows which way this is headed, but Trumpism represents a great retreat from those commitments.
The bottom line, apparently, is that liberalism requires power to be contained within its authorized and constitutional boundaries, executive power. Jill, who is going to limit the stretching of this executive power by President Trump? Congress doesn't seem to be doing its job. That is presumably its job.
Yeah, the separation of powers means that it's the job of everybody but the executive to exercise a braking force on any kind of overreach. That's true of any branch of government. Congress has been feckless for some time now, really since the 1980s. It's a function of the incredible polarization of the United States, part of which is a consequence of our two-party system, but also really that's a function of widening income inequality in the United States. Those two are really closely related. So Congress has been extremely ineffective, even without this situation in which Trump enjoys a Republican Senate and a Republican House.
Timothy Garton-Ash, what is Europe seeing and interpreting in this moment? Because obviously the United States, and you were a witness to the end of the Cold War, played a pretty significant role in that. And now, again, it does seem to be turning its back on that tradition, certainly in foreign policy.
What many Europeans are saying is this is the end of the West, not as a historical or cultural entity, but as a geopolitical actor.
And what do you think, you know, is it just Trump, or is it America's reputation and what America stands for, as somebody suggested, that's been shot in these 100 days? In other words, what do people think about Americans today, having imbued so much, good intentions into America over the years?
So I would say two different things. The Princeton scholar John Eichenberg has a great term. He talks about the US having been a liberal leviathan. And to the extent that that liberal international order worked, it was often because there was a kind of hegemon, which was the United States, NATO being the obvious example, right? But the other bit of it is the soft power, and I can speak for myself. I mean, for the whole of my life, I've had a basically positive default view of the United States and seen the United States as a natural friend of freedom in Europe and elsewhere. And I, like many others, are now very much having second thoughts. We're never going to have America back in the same way.
Jill, let me ask you about some of the key touchstones. There are, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well, an obsession with immigration, migrants, that side of the identity piece, right? And I guess I'm trying to figure out whether America has showed its face. They wanted a president who would stop migration into the US, at least they say illegal migration. Now we've got polls on the first 100 days which suggests the American people feel that he's gone too far, that the mass deportations, ignoring the courts, are just a step too far. What does America stand for?
I think America is truly divided on this question. And I think on the whole, a lot of Americans are fairly ill-informed about it as a consequence of just the disruptive force of social media over the last 20 years. Not to say that immigration isn't just a substantive policy issue on which Americans have really clear policy differences and preferences, but I think that has gotten bound up in the tribalism of American politics. So it becomes hard to know what Americans really think about immigration because it's kind of a proxy for all the other issues that divide Americans.
Let me ask you, Jill, from a US perspective. America has gone through illiberal periods, great and grave ones, going way back to Jim Crow, the Japanese internment during the Second World War, the Red Scare. How does America look to the past and figure out how to emerge from this one, if indeed it ever will?
You know, I actually think the last burst of democracies is the best model for our understanding historically of this moment. So thinking about that rising number of democracies since 1974, there was a similar rise in the number of democracies after the First World War, right? Well, Wilson said he was going to make the world safe for democracy. And as European empires collapsed, democracies were born. And then during the economic crises of the 1920s, they began collapsing. And in the US, that seemed possible as well. The 1930s in the United States were, you just couldn't open a magazine without coming across a series of essays or a symposium or forum on the future of democracy. Everyone was concerned in the United States that the United States might fall prey to fascism or to communism or to technocracy, the movement that was led in North America by Elon Musk's grandfather. There was this real sense that liberal democracy might not survive in the 1930s because the forces of liberalism were on the rise all over the world. Same was true in Britain, of course, a kind of brown shirt moment. And I think that how Americans confronted that challenge in the 1930s is a possible model for this moment, in that those conversations, well, what do we do if democratic behavior seems to be on the decline, if people's commitment to the separation of powers seems to be falling, if our sense that the country can endure as a self-governing entity is one that we are questioning? People got together in essentially versions of town meetings and tried to talk through issues. The broadcast media was really important to American democracy in those years, the way that radio was used to try to bridge divides among Americans, to try to restore faith in democracy. And then, of course, the leadership of Roosevelt. So we don't have a Roosevelt in this moment, obviously, but I do think there are lessons to be learned from the 1930s in particular.
That's really interesting. And Tim, from an outside America point of view, we just saw Mark Carney, the head of the Liberal Party, basically rise his party from underwater polls by essentially running on an anti-Trump platform. I just want to play what he said when he won.
Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The system of open global trade, anchored by the United States, a system that Canada has relied on since the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity for a country for decades, is over.
So that's pretty profound in its bleakness and its realism. Do you think, Tim, when you think about how, illiberal democracies can be pushed back outside the United States, like you mentioned Hungary and elsewhere, there is a playbook?
I do. First of all, Trump is actually a gift to the opponents of Trumpism in much of the world. Without Trump, Mark Carney would not have that victory. We have an Australian election coming up next weekend, and again, it looks as if the Conservatives will suffer from their association with Trump. All over Europe, hard-right populists are deeply embarrassed by their association with Trump. So that's point number one. Point number two, because quite a few other countries went into this dismantling of democracy, this anti-liberal revolution, which is what you're seeing in the United States, sooner, we have some experience about how you get out of it. For example, Poland had a populist government for 8 years, which nearly succeeded in doing what Viktor Orban did in Hungary, and what indeed Trump is trying to do in the United States, because of course Trump is famously a great admirer of Viktor Orban, but has come out the other side. And one lesson is very, very simple. Win the next election. The polls came out of it because despite it not being a free and fair election, not a level playing field, they had the biggest turnout in Polish history. More young people voted than old people, more women than men, and they just swung the election. So one lesson for the United States is win the midterms. It's
really fascinating. And next time we talk, hopefully we'll talk about a potential world without the US as the defender of the liberal world order that it created. Timothy Garton Ash, Jill Lepore, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.